Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin was born on October 7, 1952, when his family had been living in Leningrad since the end of World War II. When he was born, the atmosphere in Russia was quite strange. The wounds of the war that had ended 7 years earlier had not yet healed. On the contrary, the Soviet Union had become a mechanism that was constantly opening new wounds under the leadership of Joseph Stalin. On the one side, there were the deadly Gulag camps, where criminals who committed crimes against the state were thrown with their entire families. On the other side, there were members of the Secret Service NKVD who hunted for traitors to feed these camps. The espionage activities that were woven to hunt those who were opposed to the ideology of the state within the country were so strong and intimidating that even the knowledge of the existence of torture camps would not be able to leave the territory of Russia until the collapse of the Soviet Union. In all this cruel environment, there was no need for Vladimir Putin's family to be afraid, because the target of the mechanism was definitely not people like them. The Putin family was a traditional but also socialist revolution-friendly family that could be exemplified within the Soviet Union. Vladimir Putin's grandfather had supported the Bolshevik Revolution in his time and had also served as Stalin's cook. When it is considered that Stalin had killed people around him only because of suspicions based on his intuition, being Stalin's cook shows how clean Putin's family background was for the Soviet Russia. This clean family background would be the basic element that would allow Vladimir Putin to enter the KGB, the most elite unit of the state, in the years to come. In addition, the fact that his father, Vladimir Spiridonovich Putin, was a World War II veteran also contributed to the cleanliness of this background. Vladimir's father was affiliated with the Secret Service NKVD, which would later be renamed as the KGB during the war years. When Adolf Hitler drove the vast German armies deep into Russia, his father played an active role in repelling the attacks of the Nazis. He somehow survived this war. 300,000 people had died on the Piatachok front where he fought, and his entire unit, except him, had been destroyed by the Nazis. His survival under these conditions was a miracle. It was such a miracle that he was interrogated by the Secret Service on suspicion of switching to the German side. This survival from the war alive would pave the way for the birth of Vladimir Putin and his ascension to the head of Russia about 70 years later. Vladimir Putin was born into a home where stories of World War II were often told. These stories were full of heroism and praise for the Soviet Union. Despite Stalin's death in 1953, criticism of the Soviet Union could still lead to death. Even after Stalin's death, the closed and repressive system he had created continued. As a result, the war stories told in the Putin's home were free from critical scrutiny. They were similar to American propaganda films. In the years to come, Putin would be influenced by this atmosphere in his home and would want to serve the state. Additionally, the apartment where they lived was a significant part of this ambiance. The apartment building at 12 Baskov Lane was where Putin and his family would live for over 20 years. In this apartment, they had to live a communal life, sharing their rooms with 2 other families. The building had no hot water or bathtubs, and the kitchens were a shared area used by everyone in the apartment. This apartment, designed in the style of 19th century Russia, was a communal apartment built for the working class. This environment, where everyone interacted with each other and reflected the traditional family culture, would be where Vladimir Putin would spend his first 30 years of life. His parents were typical Russian parents who could not show their love physically, but cared deeply for their children. Although they would have loved for their son to study, Putin would be a failing and naughty student at school. The reason for this failure and mischievousness was clear. The families in his neighborhood spent most of their day working, so the children were neglected. As a result of this neglect, children were drawn into the cruelty and coldness of the street, and they acquired bad habits. Putin was one of them. His teachers were very complaining about his behavior, and he was even not accepted to the Communist Party organization, which was a rite of passage for a Soviet citizen due to his behavior. His teacher's advice was to direct his very active and rebellious character to an appropriate sport. As a result of these encouragements, Putin met the Sambo branch, which would change his outlook on life and be the foundation for the formation of his future successful career. Sambo was a Soviet style that combined judo and wrestling. Although this martial art was very suitable for directing Putin's active character in the right way and building his outlook on life on healthy foundations, the biggest thing that would change his perspective would be his meeting with his Sambo coach, Anatoly Raklin. This acquaintance completely changed Putin's life. With the guidance of his Sambo coach, Putin moved away from his street thug life and began to take his studies seriously. He was now spending his energy in the Sambo sport, which he never stopped doing. After this period, his academic life slowly improved, and he was accepted into the Communist Party organization, which he had previously been denied, as a representative of exemplary citizenship. His goal was to serve in the state's secret service, a successful agent, which he had desired since childhood. Of course, this desire was not a coincidence. Movies, books, and ordinary leaflets on the street all had the signature of the state, and they all served one thing: propaganda. Like many young people, he was also affected by this environment, but the difference that distinguished him from others was that he would pursue this desire to the end and do his best to join the KGB, so much so that everyone around him wanted him to study at a vocational school. But he refused all these requests and successfully completed the exam of Leningrad State University, which only a handful of people could pass, and started his education at this school as a law student in 1970. Both academic and physical skills were essential to be noticed by KGB agents and to be included in this secret service. Putin had both of them. He had been actively practicing Sambo for many years, and he was also one of the leading successful students in the law department. In addition to all these good qualities, he also established friendships with people he thought were connected to the organization in order to join the KGB. As a result of all this effort, he was officially accepted into the organization by the KGB in 1974, after graduating from the law department. His cool-headed and reliable character, clean family background, success as a law student, and the discipline and willingness he gained from his long history of sports were a victory for the KGB, but not for Vladimir Putin. Because the espionage activities he dreamed of in his childhood did not match the work he would do when he joined the KGB. The leading roles in the spy movies he watched as he grew up were cool agents who infiltrated Hitler's headquarters and brought down the Nazis from within. His espionage career, on the other hand, was a career similar to that of an ordinary clerk, working at a desk in the midst of bureaucratic documents. His first 10 years as a KGB agent passed in the KGB headquarters in Leningrad, overseeing the correspondence of politicians and classifying documents. The main reason for this stagnation was also that the situation inside Russia was calm. Active espionage activities were located in Russia's satellite states and places where it launched invasions. When Russia invaded Afghanistan in 1979, while specially trained KGB agents who had received training in Moscow were carrying out secret missions in Afghanistan, he was busy with documents in one of the safest and calmest cities in Russia. For 10 years, until he got married, he lived in Leningrad in his parents' house and served as a simple desk KGB agent. His marriage in 1985 and his transfer to East Germany, a satellite state of Soviet Russia, would somewhat liven up this boring career. Putin was sent to the KGB headquarters in Dresden, East Germany, thanks to his high level of German. This was more active than the job he did in Leningrad, but it was still better than the boring environment in Leningrad, even though it was not the mobility that would decorate his childhood dreams. At least the poverty and crises that were taking place in Soviet Russia were not found here. East Germany, although a Soviet satellite state, was a European country and still maintained its cultural heritage before it came under Soviet influence. Although it was a socialist satellite state, traces of the capitalist revolutions of the West could also be found here. The KGB's goal here was to prevent capitalist revolutions from completely taking over East Germany. The KGB was operating its activities here under the name of the Ministry for State Security, which was a ministry of the German Democratic Republic. This ministry, which seemed independent by name, was completely under the control of the Soviet Union. The Stasi members were all composed of KGB agents who had been trained in the Soviet Union. Vladimir Putin was also assigned to this organization to collect information about the economic and political innovations of the West. With this assignment, Putin's espionage career once again became boring, and he once again found himself in the midst of boring bureaucratic activities. His colleagues described him as a not-so-bright agent. The fact that he could not rise much within the KGB, even though he was approaching 40 years old, and that his career was quite stagnant, supported the claims of his colleagues. However, the experience he gained by doing all these boring bureaucratic tasks for years would open the door to something much bigger than being an agent, to be the new Tsar of Russia. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and 1 year later, the existence of the East German regime, which supported the Soviet Union, officially ended as a result of the mass movements that followed. This collapse resulted in the end of the existence of the Stasi organization to which Putin was affiliated and his unemployment. Putin, who returned to the city of Leningrad, where he spent most of his life, from East Germany, also faced a politically volatile environment that was ready to explode at any moment. The city was divided politically into two. On the one hand, there were Democrats who wanted the dissolution of the Soviet Union and Russia's transition to capitalist democratic rule, while on the other hand, there were traditional segments who wanted the Soviet Union to continue. In addition, the person at the head of this innovative democratic movement was Putin's law professor from Leningrad University, Anatoly Sobchak. Anatoly Sobchak was a significant political figure in Russia. He rose to prominence during the late Soviet era and played a pivotal role in the country's transition to democracy. Sobchak won the local elections in 1990, defeating the Communist Party's Leningrad leader, Yuri Solovyev, and entered the legislature representing Leningrad. This victory symbolized change in Soviet Russia, but it also brought danger to Sobchak. This danger could strike Anatoly Sobchak any moment because he had no supporters within the state. No matter how democratic Sobchak was, and no matter how much he was in favor of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, he turned to the KGB to secure his anti-socialist political movement. Sobchak's goal was to find a consultant for himself within the KGB, thus connecting with the deep state, securing his life and career. Several names were presented to him to be his consultant within the KGB. Among these names was Vladimir Putin, whose foreign intelligence career had been completely terminated. He chose Putin, his former student, from among the KGB agents presented to him and appointed him as his consultant. Thus, Vladimir Putin's political career began as Sobchak's consultant. On the eve of the collapse of the Soviet Union, Putin was both acting with the Democrats and still officially within the KGB. He played a double game during this short-lived period because it was not yet certain that Soviet Russia would collapse. If the mechanisms within the state decided to eliminate the Democrats and the existence of the Soviet Union continued, Putin could escape from the negative situations that could arise, so he did not resign from his KGB agency completely. The date he would resign from the KGB was after the failed coup against reformist President Mikhail Gorbachev, led by Defense Minister Dmitry Yazov. The failed coup by the conservative wing accelerated the collapse of the Soviet Union, leading to the declaration of independence by the countries within the Union on December 26, 1991, and the transformation of Russia into a democratic capitalist state. In the first elections after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Boris Yeltsin was elected president, while Anatoly Sobchak was elected mayor of Leningrad. Sobchak changed the name of the city to its pre-Soviet revolutionary name, St. Petersburg. The change of the name of the city symbolized the beginning of a new era. The biggest winner of this change would be Putin. With the election of Anatoly Sobchak as mayor, his career also rose, and he had the opportunity to show himself in the political arena. Putin would quickly climb the political ladder, even surpassing Sobchak's fame. During this 5-year period, he appeared on live television programs and gave interviews to newspapers. He made a name for himself as a bureaucrat. His early success opened the doors of the Kremlin to him in 1996. It was as if someone had really noticed his intelligence and invited him to the stage, because his political career quickly took off from then on. In 1996, he was appointed as an advisor to Boris Yeltsin and became the head of the Federal Security Service, the new form of the KGB. Throughout this 10-year political process, he used the cameras very well, and Vladimir Putin's name was often mentioned on television channels. His connections to the KGB and his mysterious character were frequently discussed in Russian political programs. This mysterious personality, like today, had attracted the attention of people not only in Russia, but also outside Russia. He began to be seen as the future president of Russia by some segments. The resignation of Boris Yeltsin from the presidency in 1999 due to health problems and the replacement of Putin made this possibility almost certain. The change of power between the presidents showed who the dark hand of the state had chosen for the presidential elections to be held a year later. However, there was a problem, and that was the problem of the jihadists in Chechnya. Chechnya had declared its independence in 1991, along with the collapse of the Soviet Union. However, this independence was not recognized by the Russian Federation under the presidency of Boris Yeltsin, and it was abolished again with the military operations conducted in 1994-1996. This abolition led to the jihadists in Chechnya carrying out terrorist attacks in Russia. It was during this period that these terrorist attacks reached their peak when Vladimir Putin became president after Boris Yeltsin's resignation. The jihadist groups, seeing the change of president as weakness in the Russian Federation, attacked the Russian territories near Chechnya and carried out terrorist attacks in the city. These terrorist incidents caused a great stir in the public and created a sense of unity in Russia's domestic politics. The only person who would take full advantage of these events that took place on the eve of the election would be Putin. He appeared on television programs, targeted the West and Russia's enemies, and made effective speeches that gave confidence to the Russian people. In addition, he launched a large-scale military operation against Chechnya, which attacked the Russian territories and threatened its independence, despite warnings from all foreign states. This savior role led to his election as president with 52% of the vote in the presidential election held a year later. Thus, the oligarchic order established by Vladimir Putin in Russia began.